I believe that there are three main things that people have to develop. You've got skills, you've got traits, and then you've got beliefs about the world. You are limited, or at least in my view, entrepreneurs are limited by one of those three at any given moment. So if you have impeccable character and you have great beliefs about the world, but you have no skills, you will only be able to provide value to the level of your skills. Now, once you add a ton of skills to your tool belt, the sky's the limit. The flip side, you've got tons of skills, right? But you don't have the character trait of focus, right? Like you can't stick with something for a long time. That's your grit that you were referencing earlier. Or you can't take rejection. That's a trait, right? And so it doesn't matter how skilled you are or what you believe to be possible in the world and what you want to allocate your time and energy and resources and skills towards, you won't be able to accomplish it because you don't have the character trait to get there.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because in my first business, I struggled to believe in myself. I quit on my business partner. And the thing that saved me was watching the successful stories of entrepreneurs. They gave me the inspiration to keep going, as well as the strategies of what to do. And quite honestly, I still need their stories and motivation today as well. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Alex Hormozi, and my take on his top 10 rules for success. Enjoy. Rule number 2 is learn to leverage.
Learning about leverage was the thing that took me a long time to understand in terms of what boat I'm in. So I'll give you the quote from Warren Buffett, but he said, I'll give you the full quote. So he had his closest friend from Columbia Business School who went to school with him. They were really smart, really hardworking, liked each other a lot. When they finished, his best buddy went to do into steel business, manufacturing steel, and then he started Berkshire Hathaway. 30, 40 years later, this guy, the steel business is a tough business, right? He made an okay living. He's like, but he didn't do anything really exceptional. And then Warren built Berkshire Hathaway. And he said, and that's when I learned that it wasn't about how hard you row, but what boat you're in. And so there's a lot of really, really hardworking people out there who are really smart. They're just not, the thing that they're missing is ignorance of opportunity, is ignorance of leverage. And so if you can get into a better leverage opportunity, the same time or same effort or same intelligence can yield you a 10x, 20x, 1000x return, which is hard to conceptualize, but still true. Mm-hmm. And so understanding the leverage of the opportunity, and then from a character perspective, understanding that I have to pick a high leverage opportunity and I must stick with it for an unreasonable amount of time. I have to just keep doing it. And the outsized returns, the compounding of the opportunity comes from the depth of the experience, which comes through repetition. And so a lot of people get, whether a mile wide, an inch deep, rather than a mile deep, an inch wide. And most times that kind of depth of experience is what gives you the compounding outsized returns in the longer haul. And so I think if I had known, one, how to pick the right opportunity, and two, said, okay, if I did just this thing for the next 10 years, it would be unreasonable for me not to be a billionaire, then nothing else matters. Mm-hmm. So even if somebody's like, dude, I've got this new tech thing, it's gonna be huge, I could say, totally understand. But if I do just the thing I'm doing right now, I'll get to $1 billion, which is right now the current goal, right?
Yeah.
And so that's it. And I could have 20 other things. Dude, we gotta do this building together. I'll bet you I could make money on that. But if I do nothing else besides this one thing that I'm focused on, I will get to $1 billion. And so everything that is not that is a distraction from that.
Rule number 3 is spend on education.
When you're in your 20s, you probably aren't balling. And the amount of people on Instagram I see with their check mark that they bought in front of a Lambo that they whatever, we all get it. They're full of shit. We understand. The people who matter are not impressed. If I wear a $200,000 watch, all the buddies that I have don't give a shit. The guys who are ahead of you, they want to see you eating shit, living poor, learning, and hustling. You driving around in your new Rolls or Benz or whatever, and you're maxing out all of your expenditures so you can flex to other 20-year-olds is stupid. Now you should take that same money and plow all of that into your own ability to earn more money. And that's what somebody who's ahead of you is gonna look back and give you that status and respect for. You can get status in your 20s from people who are ahead of you if you're doing the right stuff. If you show that you're on the wrong path, they automatically think, they're like, he doesn't get it, or she doesn't get it. They'll never associate with you until you understand the lesson.
Rule number 4 is work double time.
This is something I struggled with young. I don't know if you did. When I was young, I didn't have a lot of capital. I used to think, no, I will do these things because I can't afford the expenditure right now. Were you ever that way when you were young in business?
Totally.
I just held on
100%.
Because I'm like, I had this scarcity idea that this may be the $2,000 a month that keeps me in business. Yet it was the very thing that kept me in the small business I had.
I think you got to work double time. there's no real sexy answer that I have for that, which is just like, you have to work the normal amount you would to make your money. And then you have to make enough, and then you work again to make someone else's money. And that's in the beginning. So it's like, I'm making my job and I'm making someone else's job so that I can buy that time that I used to work to pay someone else.
Very good.
To then make more money in that period of time.
Really good.
And the big thing that I think a lot of guys, because on the flip side of the entrepreneur space, the influencer or whatever space, people are always talking about buying your time back, but then they don't talk about what you do with the time you bought back. So if you just buy your time back and don't do anything, you're going to make less money. Like, just want to be clear.
Yeah.
But because I had an entrepreneur who was talking, he was like, I bought all my time back. He's like, but I'm really not making it. I was like, you're not doing anything. Like, you still need to work. You just got to now work on higher leverage opportunities. More dollars per time. So in that input is my time, my output is my money. So it's a higher leverage thing of my time.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5 is study resource allocation.
I hate to use this term, but I'm pretty good at resource allocation. And so what I mean by that is, if we have limited resources and time and money and bandwidth or attention, and we have unlimited options that the world presents us, we have to learn to say no to 99.99% of things truly, because options are unlimited, resources are. And so the ability to allocate resources, I think for me, has allowed me to move through things quickly. Yeah. I've been able to move quickly through life because I've been able to allocate my energy into the highest leverage activities, the things that I get the most return on for my time.
Rule number 6 is seek good opportunities.
Something that I was analyzing a lot, because we get lots of entrepreneurs who are like, hey, what should I do with my life, et cetera. And when I look at how my income has increased, throughout my career, a lot of times it wasn't a function of the work ethic. In the beginning, you have to work, right? But then the next big lever on that is the opportunity. And so if you think about any kind of output in a system as volume times leverage equals output, the work has to start. So you have to have something to multiply, which is the effort. And then the next is that leverage. And so within the context of a business, I tried to define it for myself, which was, how many potential units of the product can I sell? And then what is the gross margin potential of the product that I'm trying to sell? And then what are the competitive dynamics within the marketplace? And so an example of something that has 2 of the 3 and not necessarily all 3 would be like, if I want to get into telecommunications. So I said, okay, I hate that I have no service. Like, I want to solve this problem. And so I'd say, well, everybody needs phone stuff. So huge potential market. The gross margins on an additional user is almost 100%. So, okay, really attractive. But then what are the competitive dynamics? Oh, I would have a really hard time entering into this marketplace because it's super capital intensive, et cetera. And it's like, okay, so maybe the opportunity now we rewind the clock 50, 60 years or 80 years, and that was the opportunity, right? Because you had all 3 of the dynamics. But then you look at newer things like crypto, you look at, the cannabis industry, which is still nascent. And those were, a lot of people smoke weed or want to, be involved in that industry or participate in consuming it, right? There's great margins, especially if you're vertically integrated within the space. And then the competitive dynamics are still, like, you can still be a new entrant and have a huge amount of market share as it's continuing to grow faster than the rest of the marketplace as well. So there's a fast growing market that's growing faster. So if you just stayed the same as the market, you're still going to outpace anybody else.
Really good.
And there's fewer people taking it up. And so it's like you have two competitive dynamic kind of like trail winds behind you. And so when I looked at, like, we exited our 3 companies last year, I was like, okay, I want to be really, really selective about what opportunity we pursue, because I know that, Warren Buffett's like one of my big heroes, and he talks about how it's much more about not about how hard you row, but about what boat you're in. And he tells a story about how he had a companion who was basically the same as him, and they both split off from Columbia, and he became Warren Buffett, and the other guy just had a normal career in the steel business. Different opportunity. And so I think being selective about the opportunities we pursue is probably the greatest leverage point you have on your career.
Rule number 7 is set smart priorities.
I shortcutted so much stuff when I was younger. I just wanted to like get it done, rather than doing it well. There's kind of two ways you can take the saying, which is why I like it so much, is that if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Because many times I was doing things that were not worth doing. I didn't have the time to do things well because I was doing so many things that were not worth doing. The first criteria is, what problem are we solving? What am I hoping to accomplish? Is this worth doing at all? Because if it is worth doing, then I have to understand that to do it, right, to do it well, it's gonna take this much time. Now, given that, is it still worth doing? And if it passes that test of A, being worth doing in the long haul, and because it is worth doing well, then it gives us this lens through which to see the activities we do so that we can prioritize the things that will make us the most money or get us closer to the goals we have. And so younger me had more energy than me does now. I make way more money than younger me did. And it's because I do fewer things and I do different things than I did then. And now, if I write a book, I'll take a year on writing the book, because if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Because I understand that taking 1 year today will mean that that book might sit and sell and distribute itself to millions of people over the next 50 years or 100 years or after I'm dead, compared to me just putting words on a page that are pretty good and then shipping it. And I think the vast majority of people don't get the difference between good and great. The ocean between good work and great work is vast. It's 5 times, 10 times the work to go from something good to something great, which is why you have to be really selective about the few things you choose to do that are worth doing, and in being worth doing well.
Rule number 8 is choose your circle.
People live with the wrong people. They have terrible roommates who break things, who go out drinking, who are late on rent. Like, these are all things that'll distract you from the thing you're trying to do. That's like level 1 worst type of roommate. Above that, you've got people who are responsible, etc., but they don't have the same goals as you. They will speak over you their limiting beliefs, and they will oftentimes not actually root for you, and they will kind of undercut you when you're on this path, which is probably different than them. And the thing is in the beginning, what becomes success looks like failure. You're learning, you're not earning. They're already pulling their earning trigger. They're bragging on the fact they make 70 grand a year. Whatever. Because you have a different goal. And so never listen to people who have smaller goals for your life than you do. But making sure that you're living with a type of people who are trying to do the same thing as you are in your life, will encourage one another, and you guys are kind of like in the game together. That's what will shape the way you see the world. I do think it's worth living with multiple people in your 20s, because 1, your 20s can be lonely, but 2, it's also just a lot cheaper. I lived in a house with 7 people in California, and I was able to only pay $400 a month in like a nice area.
Rule number 9 is embrace the work.
Well, I'll say a statement that we say a lot in our community, which is your work works on you more than you work on it. And so I believe that we were meant to work.
Yes.
We were built to work.
Yes.
And I had a very a rock bottom experience, which was in a rock top situation. So I'll tell this to give context. So last year we exited 3 of our companies for a sizable amount. And during that year, I wasn't really allowed to work because I couldn't show that I was doing anything in the business. We also couldn't make any big changes because you don't want to change stuff during a transaction, et cetera. And so during that year, I basically had to take off, because I'm a big believer in not starting new things until like you have finished the thing that you were working on. And so I pretty much had to sit idle. And it was one of the more depressed years of my life because I had to just sit on my hands and do nothing. And I realized the blessing that it is so much worse. It is worse to not be able to work than to be forced to work.
Yes.
If I had to pick,
Agreed.
Being unable to work is worse than being forced to work. And so I think if we extrapolate that out, we learn to derive pleasure from work in a job well done. And I think that the gain or pleasure that you get is proportional to the pain that you experienced to achieve the outcome or accomplishment. If something comes easy, it means less to you.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if we want to have these meaningful experiences as humans, then we must bear the price of that, because there's no way we can cheat it. What we put in is what we will get out. Like, what we reap is what we sow. And so if we want to have the big reap, we have to sow big. And so I think that's what people want, is they want the big reaping without the big sowing.
That's absolutely right.
And you cheat yourself, because you don't get the emotional experience of the fulfilled victory without the grit, the suffering that leads to it.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is learn to invest.
You want to save money in your 20s, but not actually save it. You want to not spend it or blow it on shit. and you want to put it into a separate account, but that money you want to invest, not dollar cost averaging S&P or whatever it is. You can do that by all means. It's a great way to like have some money later. But if you want to become filthy rich, which is hopefully, you know, what Monetization is here to do, you want to invest that money into you and your earning capacity. Right now, you make so little that the money doesn't matter. So like if you save $500 a month, save $1,000 a month, you can put that into the calculator and look what it's going to be in 70 years. And like, cool. One, it doesn't factor in inflation. So when people see that they're going to be worth $4 million in 60 years is also worth like $1 million today. Think about how much more you'll get back if you spend $10,000 this year and then you double your earning capacity or you triple your earning capacity. Instead of saving money to invest in assets, invest in the number one asset, which is you, and increasing your earning potential. I think like people have two sets of resources, right, that they allocate. So they've got time and they've got money.
Yeah.
And so if you look at someone's bank statement and you look at their calendar, you know what their life is. And you can also predict where their life is going to be in X amount of years, right? And so if someone wants to change what their life is going to look like, you have to reallocate where you're investing the resources that you have. And so from a time perspective, people who are poor, in my opinion, spend a lot of time not doing stuff. And that sounds terrible to say, but like at the base level, they're distracted, they're
not doing the right
procrastinating.
stuff.
Right. Well, I would even say not doing anything.
Just distracting them,
Right.
playing
Just
video games,
Netflix, et cetera, you know,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that stuff, right? So there's like the basis, like they don't do anything. They're purely distracting themselves from their current state, which is hard because it's hard to confront reality. If you're like not happy, it's easier to just distract yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the level above that is you've got people who are operating, they are working every day, but they're operating in low leverage opportunities, right? So they're doing things that do not give them a lot of return on their time, right? And so it's like I could work, it doesn't matter how many hours I work at McDonald's, like it's very, very difficult to become wealthy there, right? It's just near impossible, right? Versus like you could buy a building for $10 million and then sell it to somebody else for $11 million, just get the contract and make $1 million on the exchange. Super high leverage, right? From a time perspective, which is crazy for somebody who doesn't have money to even contemplate something like that. But the only way that happened, and that required no money, is skill, right? And so like that's an example of like it didn't require money to make that money. That's skill that's required to do that. And so first is the time, right? People are not doing stuff with the time that they have, or they're doing low leverage activities with the time they have. And then they're not trying to increase their output per unit time, which means investing in their skill set. So like one of the easiest ways to gain leverage on your time, and when I say leverage, just for everybody, like leverage is the difference between inputs and outputs in a system. So, Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough, I can move the world. And so to the same degree, if you have enough skills, you can do anything, right? And so skills give you leverage on your time. So you get more out of each unit of time. So if I'm a master cold caller, I will get more sales and calls booked for the same unit of time than somebody who sucks at it. Same time, more output, right?
But because they developed a skill at a masterful level.
100%.
Yeah.
And so when people are allocating their time, they're not by percentage, they're kind of like consuming their time rather than investing their time. So they're either doing nothing or they're consuming the time rather than putting time into getting higher returns on their time, which is education, right? And so education you can have from like the conceptual learnings, watching stuff like this, or the actual doing, right? And so you learn
Taking
more.
action,
100%.
failing, messing up, feeling like an embarrassment in the actions.
The first 1,000 cold calls you make, the first 1,000 cold emails you do, the first 1,000 doors you knock on, the first 1,000, you'll learn more from that than you'll learn from every single book you read up to that point on the concept. You'll learn, right? And so people don't allocate nearly enough time to that in the beginning. In a perfect world, if everyone had absolute information and everyone was unbelievably well trained and you had a great infrastructure and all that stuff, then yes, the more products and services you offer, in theory, you would make more money. But we don't live in that theoretical world most of the time, and most small business owners are not that good at operating, right? It's the number one issue they have. They're super disorganized. They feel like they're spinning their wheels all day. Their team completely has no idea which way they're going. They change things all the time, et cetera. And so in an effort to combat that, we have used this process over and over again, and it has worked very well. So it is as follows. We sell two things, and I've done this in virtually every business that I've ever owned. We sell two things. 2 products or 2 services, and this is once we're going from 1 to 10 million. All right, 0 to 1 million, you sell 1 product, 1 service, 1 avatar. All right, that's it. 1 channel, 1 product, 1 avatar. That's it. All right, but once you're going from 1 to 3-ish million, and you're trying to go to 10, you introduce the second product line. And so here's how this works. If you have two things that you sell, you'll have a front end thing and you'll have a back end thing. We can still have a massive accommodation in the buying curve based on the payment terms that we introduce. So for example, people will look at their monthly expense more than the total contract value. That's a huge money hack. I'm giving you right now. This is a wealth hack. This is something that will make you a fortune in your life if you can properly understand this. People do not look at the length or the total contract they're signing. They will only pay attention to what is it going to cost me every month, because no one is good with their money. All right, so they only look at the cash flow expense month over month over month, and they just think, can I make it happen? Yes, cool, I'll sign. They don't think about the total contract value. For you as a business owner, the contract value matters almost more than anything. So I'll give you a quick hack on this. Total side note, tangent for you, life hack. Pro tip, if you want to extend the contract value that you have, I have a saying, which is the bigger the head, the longer the tail, all right? And so what that means is the more you can get someone to pay up front, and relative to the upfront cost of signing up or what they paid down, the lower their contractual recurring payment is, the stickier it will be. So I'll give you an example. If I had someone sign up for $99 a month for whatever, it doesn't matter, that price point might be medium sticky depending on the value that I have. Now imagine I had someone pay $5,000 down and $99 a month after that. How much more sticky would it be? Significantly more sticky. Now, the beauty is if you have one of these upfront type payments, you can also use that to liquidate your ad costs, cover your commissions for the salesperson, cover the upfront fulfillment and onboarding, which is going to cost more for a new customer than an existing customer. And so you can build all that in. If you know that the thing that you are selling has very high gross margins, then you can still have a lower cost as long as you know that the person is going to stay for a long time. And so based on how you structure the pricing, you can actually you can use the pricing to actually get people to stick longer. Pro tip complete. That is it. Moving back to the original thing that I was talking about. In one of our portfolio companies, we actually had this as a really in-depth discussion that we had to make a decision about, all right? And so they had a different, mentor, person, whatever, advice, who told them that they should have 3 products. And they should have a low, a medium, and a high product. And then based on what the salesman thought, the salesman would sell them the low, medium, or high. In my experience, it is not that effective. And that is because the salesperson can't decide which of these things they're trying to sell most of the time. And so what we have found is more effective is you give the salesperson the one dream to sell. This thing is going to solve this person's problem, and we make it the most valuable thing that we're trying to sell, because at the end of the day, you do want to solve the customer's problem, right? We do want to actually make sure that we're providing value. Rather than having a diet, a medium, and a great, right? Simply having one thing that solves all the problems, and then based on the customer's budget, we can decrease how they pay, all right? So hear me out. So let's say that we want to do this is a 6-month implementation of whatever kind of solution you sell. If you have a 6-month duration, you can have the person A, pay the entire thing up front. So that would be for somebody who has the highest budget. Version 2 would be a split pay. Version 3 might be 3 payments, right, at 20% higher. And then finally, you might have a 6 pay or whatever over that period of time. So 1, 2, 3, 6. Now, here's the cool thing. The more payment options you provide, the higher your conversions are. That's proven, all right? So the more options you give someone to pay, the more people will buy, period. Now, you might not make more cash flow, because if you give your sales guy more options, then they'll end up defaulting to the lower ones, right? But if you have one thing to sell, then they only have one thing to convince the person of, because a confused mind doesn't buy. If you have too many options, the salesman won't know what to sell and the prospect won't know what to buy. And so I prefer, when I'm coming into a portfolio company, I'm thinking, what is this true problem that we are solving with this business? For what avatar? And we make that the main thing, and we communicate it clearly in the scripting, and the salesperson has clarity on what they are selling, and they're always solving the same thing. And so the question becomes no longer which of these things are you going to buy, but once you are buying, how would you like to pay? And so then the discussion is around what payment plan is best for them rather than what product is best for them. And so by doing that, you can get people to go between different payment terms. That is not going to change whether they're going to buy. But if they're unsure about which product is going to best suit their needs, and the salesman doesn't know, because at the end of the day, he's just trying to sell the most expensive thing, then you'll have way more confused people who leave unsold. So this is a single tactic that you can use to execute within your business, which is why I'm a big fan of making offers people cannot say no to, is that you can focus all of your sales and all of your persuasion attempts on selling the one thing, which is getting them to say yes. Once they say yes, we can accommodate their wealth and their budget based on the payment terms that we provide. And if we have structured our offer properly, the offer in and of itself should already be very high gross margins, which means whether or not the person pays $1,000 a month or $100 a month, it's still almost all margin for us because of how we structure the thing that we are selling. And so we are able to capture higher LTVs by getting the people who have more money to prepay the thing up front. That is how we do it. And with those people, you'll be able to ascend into the second thing faster because they've already prepaid that thing. And then you can solve the next natural problem in another sales conversation rather than trying to pick all of the things in one conversation, which makes it incredibly difficult to do. This is, just for everyone, again, a broad brushstroke of statements for most entrepreneurs who are not very good at operating their businesses, who operations is not their strong suit, and are below $3 million a year. You absolutely just need skills. You can have nothing else in your life. And a beautiful thing is that no government can take it from you. No person can take your skills from you in a divorce. Those are always your own, which is something that, I don't know, for some reason feels magical to me. And so one of the things that I've seen as I've kind of, moved up, I'm not saying that arrogantly, just developed, progressed, whatever, is that the people who I surround myself with now have more money than the people that I surrounded myself when I was early on in my career. And what's ironic is that these people actually spend less money. They have less desire to spend money. And they find ways to acquire things for less money out of pocket. And that's always really interesting to me. And so right now, I think there's, if you were to look at quote investment opportunities, right? You could invest in buying a house. So let's say you've got, I'll do two scenarios, all right? Let's say you've got $50,000, all right? And you're like, okay, I'm thinking about buying a house, right? And I think for a first house, you might only have to put 10% down. I'm not sure. It's 10 or 20. I don't remember. But anyways, let's just say 10 for sake of whatever. So $500,000 house, all right? You put 10% down and then you get the mortgage, right? You get the liability of the mortgage payment every month. Yippee. Now, if you were to, and let's say that in order for you to save that, you've been making, I don't know, 60 grand a year and you've been saving that for, 5 years, something like that. Now, let's look at an alternative scenario where you are still making that same amount of money, 60, and you saved up 50. And instead of buying a house, you have a long conversation with your spouse and you say, or maybe you don't have a spouse, whatever, with yourself. And you say, I wonder how much money I could get for this money. Ah, interesting, right? And so you leaf through the businesses that are in your area. And by the way, the best way to do that is, one, you should contact brokers, not necessarily to buy a business, but to get an idea of some of the businesses that are in the area and what price ranges look like. But if you buy from a broker, you're going to pay retail. You could definitely negotiate a deal. And I'll tell you one of the deals that I did that was really good at the end of this. Anyways, so let's say you reach out to some businesses, things that you like or enjoy or feel like you have some specialized knowledge in, and you find out that there's a business that's doing, let's say, I don't know, $250,000 a year in profit, right? And because it's a small local owned business and you're not going to pay retail for it, you get it for 2.5 times earnings, right? Which would be, what's 2.5 times? It's 525, hopefully, I think. 2.5? No, that's 625, excuse me. $625,000 is what a business you might pay for a business that's doing $250,000 a year in profit, all right? Now, here's where it's interesting, right? So I had an early mentor who taught me this negotiation tactic that I've used pretty much throughout my entire life since this moment, and I used it in the deal that I'll tell you about in a second, which is agree on price, then agree on terms, right? And so when you would go to quote talk to this business, right? There's the price, which you might say, cool, this business is $625, and then there's terms, right? And so the term side, once you've agreed on the price, you negotiate down, whatever, and then you say, okay, well, I'm going to need you to seller finance, meaning you're not going to pay anything, you're going to pay them over time, right? I need you to seller finance,
3/4 of the deal. All right. And so 3/4 of the deal, man, I'm doing some math today, but like 430-ish, 437, whatever, $1,000. And you're going to finance that for, 3 years, right? And then on top of that, or 5 years, you could do whatever you want here. I think, you could probably, you try and push it out as far as you can, right? And then what you have remaining, which would be like, in this instance, $200,000, then you get a note from the bank, right, or SBA loan, which you have a $200,000 loan for, and you put your $50,000 down, right? So then that would be 200. So you put 50, which would be 25% of 200,000. So I'm going to recap this. 625 is the cost of the business. 437 you get seller finance, meaning you can pay that over time, and then you've got $200,000 that you get a loan from the bank. So which you put $50,000 for. So if you're thinking about this, the guy who's selling the business, he sells for 625, but he's only getting 200,000 up front. You're only putting 50 of that 200, and you're taking a loan for the rest of it, right? And so when you're looking at this, you've now acquired this business that makes $250,000 a year, right? So you upgraded your income from 60 to 250,000, right? And within 24 months, all of that income will be yours. And maybe hopefully you'll grow it, or you'll probably try and work extra hard and take over some of the other positions, or cut out some of the waste, et cetera, in the business. And so that massively speeds you up in life, right? And if you compare that to what it would cost you to start your own business, in terms of investment and like existing book of business, client lists, all the knickknacks you have to buy that you don't even think of, zoning permits, and all the fees and licenses, it's actually a pretty decent deal. So I'll tell you one of the deals that I did that was pretty good. So I had 4 locations at this point. This is when I had the gyms, and I opened a 5th location. So the first 2 locations I opened the first one, I think, for $40,000. I put as little as I possibly could in this thing. And it happened to have been an old gym. So there was like turf already in, the flooring was already in, it was painted. Like there was a bunch of things I didn't have to pay for. So I lucked out there. But the second one, because I thought I was smarter, we put $250,000 into the second location. And here's the fun thing. It made no more money than the first location did, which I always think is hilarious. So like, to the undisciplined, everything looks like a spending opportunity. And so I pretty much would empty my bank account. And so on my 5th location, my next 2 locations were corporate locations, which were actually pretty cheap, which were pretty cool. Those are good deals. But the 5th location that I did, I had a gym that went out of business, or not out of business. He wanted to uproot because he got divorced, or he had some family crisis. And so he was looking for someone to buy his gym. And so it was beautiful. It had all this equipment that was really expensive in it. And I was like, man, this is like a dream come true. And so I agreed on price, because I had my mentor talk me through this. I agreed on price, which I think was $40,000. I think it was 40 grand. It was 40 or 50. I think it was, yeah. So that's what I agreed. And then I was like, cool, I'll pay you over the next year. And he was like, fair enough. And so, he didn't say it like that. We negotiated, and then 12 months is what we came to. And so, I tried to go for 24 months, but he agreed on 12. And so the beautiful thing with that was I didn't put any money out of pocket. So, my first gym, I put 50 grand in. Second gym, I put $250,000 in. 5th gym, smarter, more experienced me, puts no money in, right? And in the first 30 days, we did 51,000 in sales. So this gym, in the first 30 days, literally paid for itself, period, right? And so this thing is now kicking off profit, right? Every month during this whole period of time. And then 12 months later, I ended up meeting Russell and telling him how I was doing this stuff. And he's like, you should be teaching other people how to do what you're doing now. And so I ended up selling the gym for 1.5 times more than I, quote, bought it for, right? Which I then had the gym pay for it on its own. And so I basically acquired a cash flowing asset for nothing, and then just acquired a cash flowing asset for no money. And so I think about that in light of the original thing that I mentioned, was just like, I get people who message me all the time, like, what happens if I don't have any money? I don't know what to do. you always have to just get skills, or this is just my opinion, is that because there's no one who can take them from you, there's no divorce, there's no government, there's no revolution, there's no financial crisis that can ever take your skills from you. And that's why when entrepreneurs hit zero, they can usually bounce back. I've done it. I had $1,100 in my bank account at one point, at my lowest point after I had 6 gyms, right? After this. So even when I had this experience, and it sounds cool, like I messed up. And that's why I think I love the saying, you should only have to get rich once. And that's why people who are wealthy are more risk averse, because the downside risk of losing everything is always bigger, right? Like you can reverse 30 years of great decisions with any number multiplied by 0. Any number multiplied by 0. You could have $1 billion. If you make a bad investment, it goes to 0, right? And so that's why when people are like, I don't know why you're motivated, and I don't know why they're like, it's just, there's just always things that can happen. You know what I mean? And so just being risk averse is what I have noticed from the people who have the most money, is that they actually have way lower risk tolerances than the people who have no money, which is hilarious, because it's like the people who have the least amount of money then go buy lottery tickets, which are literally the worst investment you could possibly make. And they consistently invest their money in a terrible investment that has all the downside risk of going to 0. Whereas the richest people in the world find things that could never go to 0 and they buy them for 0. So think about that for a second. People are using their money, poor people use their money to buy things that have virtually guaranteed, risk of going to 0, right? With tiny risk of upside, right? Whereas rich people buy stuff for $0 that have upside potential, but that doesn't have $1 billion upside potential. They would rather have a guaranteed small return with no risk than a potential for huge return with guaranteed risk. Think about that. So anywho, I think if over time, and it's not like you can shift your perspective on this overnight. It took me a long time, and I still am doing it now. In shifting how, because I still get excited about, I see these, these cryptocurrencies 20xing and stuff, in like a month, and I'm like, man, that's crazy. But then I also think the downside risk of me going to 0 is far more upsetting to me than me getting 20 times more on some tiny investment that I would make. And so I don't do it, right? And so anyways, I say all this to say, agree on price, agree on terms, try and get something for nothing. See if you're gonna make an investment in any kind, or you're trying to start a business. There's usually a business that's already for sale or has a motivated seller, an owner who doesn't want to do it anymore, who will almost give it to you for free, right? And that's the thing, is when you're new, you're getting so excited, but you're not patient, right? That's why you have to have the character traits of being successful before you will see the success. Because if you have that character trait, you'll look and you'll say, I can take 6 months, because in the next decade of my life, there's no rush. But me making a good deal or a bad deal of should I put all my investment in this thing, or should I be able to get something that makes 4 times more money for free? You can do that. You can do that. And I'm telling you, I talk to business owners every day. I mean, guys making $1 million, $2 million, $4 million a year, who literally have told me, they're like, dude, if someone came today and offered me, guys who are making $1 million a year in profit, or if someone had offered me 200 grand right now, I would take it. I just am so tired of this business. So there are opportunities. They're just not listed anywhere. You just got to look for them.
I get asked about mindset a lot on podcasts. They're like, when you're building a business or you're building your career, there are stressors that come into play. How we manage the circumstances or the conditions that come to us dictates how our life turns out. Everybody has bad stuff happen. You probably believed and nodded your head yeah, everyone has stuff happen. And then we choose to make it bad or good. Imagine for a second, 2 children that are playing. One child tells the other child, your nose is really big, or you're fat. Interesting is that the child who hears it is unaffected, and the child who says it is unaffected. They're like, you're fat. And he's like, huh. Parent comes in and overhears it. And she's like, oh my God. Takes the child that was called fat, comforts them, gives them the expectation that they should be upset, and then tells the other one that that was bad. And in a moment, there was something that is now traumatic that otherwise wouldn't have been. And so when we're kids, we walk into the world with no meaning. All we do is we observe. And then whatever the adults around us tell us and say, this means that, we take as fact. And it's not true. It's their interpretation of the world, and we inherit them. And then we spend the rest of our life trying to undo and examine these beliefs that we have been told by people that we probably don't agree with. When something bothers you, pull it out and look at it and say, what happened? And why is this bad? And what would it look like if it were good? And so the two tools that I use are time and volume. The volume example is thinking, okay, I'm in traffic. If this happened every day, would I be upset? If it happened every day, I'd probably expect it, which means that I would not be upset about it because it's just how things always are. If you want to make it positive, you say, well, what if every time I got in a car, normally it would take an hour, and today it took 30? I'd be pretty excited about it. And so all we did is just change the volume on the circumstance to recalibrate the meaning that we're choosing to ascribe to it, good or bad. I like to think of circumstances a lot like weather, which is like you've got sunny days and you've got rainy days. And the problem, in my opinion, is that people, any day that it rains, they say is bad, and any day that's sunny, they say is good, when in reality, it just is. It's just the weather. Contrast is what create the quote good and bad, when reality there's just a middle line and half of it's above and half of it's below. Then what we can do is artificially move the line in our minds by saying whatever this circumstance is, what would it look like if it were worse? And what would it look like if it were worse all the time? And if so, then maybe today's a good thing. The second frame that I like to use is time. 100 years out, but 10,000 years out, how much is this going to matter? The reason something affects you is because you have deemed it meaningful. You've said it matters. It's my worldview that nothing matters with a capital M. Like nothing matters in the universe. It doesn't matter. There's this statue of a head that's in the sands of Egypt. All right, and it's bigger than this whole room. And it's just the head. And it's worn out, and then inscripted along the forehead, it says, here lies, crazy name, who owned everything that the eye could see, the immortal so-and-so. And the only thing that was left was a worn out statue head that no one knew who he was. And it was 5,000 years old. If that guy who ruled the known world, to him, wealth probably mattered, right? But does it matter? No, probably not. I've relieved a lot of the pressure in my life so that I could make better decisions by zooming way out and thinking 10,000 years from now, will this matter? And if the answer is no, does it matter to me? And then if I can make the decision of like good or bad based on my new context that I created, then I can live life a lot easier. And so for me, that helped me decrease anxiety. It helped me decrease sadness around certain circumstances. And I'll give you the last example of this. So I had a cat named Bill, Chill Bill, rest in peace. Homie, loved the cat. He died, it's like some freak heart thing or something. So he died in like 2 years. When he died, I was bummed. I was like, this sucks. But then I thought to myself, what if cats only normally lived 6 months? How stoked would I be that he lived 4 times the normal length of a normal cat? I was like, I'd probably be really stoked. I'd be like, dude, he lived a long life. I can't believe we had him this long. And all of a sudden, my perspective around the death completely changed. I was like, I was so grateful that I got to have him as long as I did. When you play with time and you play with volume, first off, we have to be aware of the levers of meaning that exist. And then once you're aware of them, you can start moving them in your favor and then looking at your current conditions through different lenses and say, what would this mean if it were amazing? What would the conditions have to be in order for this to be an awesome thing? And then all of a sudden, you just exit the game of happy, sad, and get to be your own game maker. At least that's what I try to do when I get upset. Look at it, pull it apart, think like, is this real? Is this true?
What it was setting the tone. And the reason that my views on business have dramatically shifted is that I have always had a tendency to lean towards strategy, acquisition, monetization, pricing structures, and all of that stuff is important. But I think within a business, there are 2 components to it. You've got the smarts and you've got the hearts, and you have to have both. And I think that most people overestimate the importance of smarts, myself included. And I think that there's a lot to do with the hearts, because business strategy overarchingly is not that complex. But like, you really think about it, right? It's like, you got to find something that's good, that people want, and you sell it for a lot more than it costs you to do it, and you do as much of that as you possibly can. Like, that's kind of the idea, right? And the thing is it gets lost in the execution. It gets lost in the doing, right? As soon as you hire your first employees, you're like, no, employees can't do what I can do. It's like, well, that's a horrible belief. You should probably change that before you try and move forward. That's a limiting belief, right? If you want to have a big business. And so when I think about this from a cultural standpoint, and this is what has shifted for me, is that it's become so much more about the soft skills. It's so much more about coaching and developing the leaders of the company. It's so much more about addressing behavioral dynamics of someone that are limiting them, more so than it is about tinkering. And I can't help but think that so many entrepreneurs, myself included, I spent so much time tinkering and tweaking things. What if we change this in our sales process? What if we change this on this page? What if we change the offer like this? What if we change this on the pricing? What if we change the payment terms? Blah, 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 blah. All these different things, right? And think about this for a second for yourself. How many things have you tinkered with in your business over the last however many years, how many months, and your business hasn't changed at all, right? Because the real problem is not the strategy. The problem is not the smarts, right? The problem is the heart, right? The people are not doing what you want them to do because they don't understand why they need to do it and why it's important, right? And that's the soft stuff. And you've got, people who don't want to talk to each other because they don't like each other because one guy's really annoying. And so it's like, it would better serve you to fix that problem than to try and come up with some new strategy, right? Realizing that has been one of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had in my career. Those two stories should illustrate the difference between having a championship mentality and having a loser mentality and what might be going on in your business. And I'll leave you with one more story really quickly. So if any of you has ever been on a championship team, right? If you've ever played in a sports arena or whatever, and you've been on a winning team, you've been on a losing team, right? And you've probably been on a losing team that had a lot of good players, but you guys were not connected, you weren't concerted, you weren't aligned, right? On the flip side, you had a winning team, and it was like everyone showed up to practice, everyone, tried their hardest. It was the effort and the consistency and the alignment of the team that accomplished the goal. The rules are the same. Everyone was trying to do the exact same thing. And so when you think about the entire business landscape, right? Your competitors have access, more or less, to the same talent pool that you do. They can see what your strategy is overall, and most people are not that dumb, right? And so as long as you have a relatively sound strategy, like you're not selling things at a loss, right? Then the difference between the two is going to be your ability to execute and have people execute on your behalf. And so that's going to become like for us as CEOs, we do shift towards becoming championship team coaches, which is why John Wooden, if he had run a business, would have had a championship business because he focused on the fundamentals. And one of my favorite sayings of all time is, advanced people never don't do the basics. Advanced people never don't do the basics. I would go to these stages and I would watch guys get on stage and they'd say, we follow up with all of our leads, within 5 minutes. When we get on sales calls, we always ask them why they're there. We label them a problem. We overview some of the past things they've done, and then they follow a clear framework. And then as soon as someone buys, we have a good onboarding process, and nothing they say is revolutionary. It's just that they actually do it, and the people are actually on their behalf. They're not the Vince, or don't have a manager like Vince, who's telling them that they shouldn't have to do that work, right? Who's sabotaging the business. What they did is they set the tone, and then they carry the bar. And so their job is to be intolerant of anything but excellence and to reinforce that in the culture so that it's consistently executed across the company. Because that, between two companies with the same strategy, will make the difference between somebody who yields disproportionate returns on advertising, crazy profits, good growth, great retention on employees, low turnover, from a company that doesn't have that, right? Even though they both have the same strategy, or even if the smaller company has the better strategy, this guy will win. And this has been one of the most profound shifts that I've had.
The biggest issue that most people have is they don't have the ability to discern what their missing link is or what their next step is. If you think about the theory of constraints, which is that a system will grow until it's constrained. And so what happens is most people add potential to a system, but they don't actually increase the throughput of the system. So for example, if I had a bridge, right, and it has a weak link in the bridge, or let's say a chain, it's probably simpler. So if you have a chain and you have to pull two things, the amount of force that you can put on the chain is just predicated based on the weakest link. And so what happens is that people reinforce a strong link and not the weak link in the chain. And so they add potential to the chain, but they don't actually add any more strength that can be pulled. And so if you think about the amount of money that you're trying to make as amount of money that you're literally trying to pull towards you, that weak link is going to be the skill deficiency that you have. And so most people solve problems that aren't really there. And they spend a lot of their time reinforcing skills that they enjoy, but that's not their deficiency. And so that's why, like, the entrepreneurship thing is, you have to be a jack of all trades, master of none. You have to be good enough to get the thing across the finish line to pull the money towards you. You don't have to have the strongest link. You just need all of the links to be strong enough. And so I think most people aren't good at assessing their own deficiencies. And so if the follow-up question is, how do you assess deficiencies, right? How do you know what's missing? The question is, what are the revenue generating activities within a business? How can I get myself closer to those revenue generating activities? And so you can look at product as a revenue generating activity. You can look at sales as a revenue generating activity. You can look at marketing as revenue generating activity. And so if you think about those as kind of the three core pillars of what businessing is, and then you have back of house, right? You've got finance, you've got IT, you've got the other pieces. But the people who ascend even in the back office know how to generate revenue, and bottom line, for their division. So for example, my CFO, Suzanne Chiflet, she led a $15 billion acquisition, $5 billion, $1 billion. The last company she was at was $750 million. She's been $1 to $100 million 2 times. So like she's been there. And the first thing she did on our first interview, she was like, "Oh, you won't have to pay for me." I was like, and she's paid very well. And she's like, "You don't have to pay for me." She's like, I'll save more than what you're ever going to pay me. Just first 6 months, I'll save you that. And I was like, "Oh, cool." And so smart people know how to do that. Like an intelligent, video editor is going to come and say, "Dude, I can 10x the amount of views that you're getting on this thing," because he's going to tie himself to marketing. A good product person is going to say, I can decrease our churn, which is going to increase your LTV. I'm going to be able to get more people to ascend because they have a higher NPS score and they're more likely to want to keep buying from us. So they have to just figure out a way to tie whatever the thing, if they're really passionate about something, by all means, go all in on it. If you're IT, then you're thinking, how can I decrease page load times? How can I get conversion rates up? You start getting into the CRO side. How can I organize the data in such a way that the CEO can make better decisions? And we have real-time reporting against all the sales guys so we can optimize our funnels towards the best converting guys, right? All aspects of the business can make more money, but people don't think about it through that lens. So the first thing is, how do I tie what I do every day to making more money in the business? You connect that dot and then you improve that connection.
I've had a lot of mentors in my career. Many of them were paid, a few of them were free. The point of a good teacher is that the student does pass the teacher. I see this thing that happens all the time. When you're a kid and you learn arithmetic, first you learn your numbers and then you learn how to add. You level up and you learn how to multiply. And then you level up from there and you learn algebra. When you get to algebra, you don't think, man, my arithmetic teacher was a idiot. I can't believe they didn't teach me this stuff. It's like, dude, you weren't ready. And you had to have the arithmetic in order to get to the multiplication. And it's not that teacher was an idiot, it's that was the sequence. And so when you have a first teacher that teaches you the basics and then you have a more advanced teacher later, it doesn't mean you should shit on your first teacher. It's like that person got you ready to receive the next thing. Earlier on in my career, I definitely did the other way. This guy didn't know anything, this guy is the guy. Rather than seeing it like you would see any other thing that you'd have in school. I've had the opportunity and the gift of being able to mentor, whatever you want to say, provide advice, counsel, share my experiences. A lot of people hold me in a regard, and most people who are winners are competitive. It's just like who you are, right? You want to win, you want to beat everybody, because that's part of the competitive drive. But I think there's a comma there that needs to get put in, which is that you have to accept 2 things. One is that you are going to die and no one is going to remember. Like real. 10,000 years from now, no one's going to remember at all. Number 2 is that when you're at the end of your life, the people who are going to be by your bedside are not the people who you vanquished, but the people that you helped. I know that I've passed a lot of the mentors that I've had in my career in terms of financials, etc. Earlier on, used to think that made me better than them. As I've had a couple more years and some more scars, I've realized something different, which is that I was only able to get better than them because they gave me the head start. Step on my shoulder, you can reach that next branch. I think I experienced a lot of joy knowing that other people don't have to suffer as much. We were walking around outside yesterday and someone's like, dude, I did everything you have and we're doing $4 million a year now. Like, he was like emotional just knowing that it's happening. It makes stomaching the hard times easier. It feels like it's not just me trying to do this for myself, it's me trying to do this for a lot of people. If I'm failing over and over again at this thing, I know that once I figure it out, I'll be able to help 100 people cheat code their way through it and not spend 5 months figuring something out or 2 years figuring something out. Like, I was stuck at mid 30 million for 3 years. To everyone watching, they're like, boo hoo. That's not the point, is that there's another guy who's gonna get to that point and he's gonna move right past it, like in a blink of an eye, because he'll have had the right advice that I didn't have. And I think that if the mentees and the mentors both see it that way, then the mentees will stop on the mentors that help them, and the mentors will stop trying to hold back secrets that have propelled them further, because the point is not that you're gonna beat everyone. You're gonna get really old, and then you're gonna die. As you're getting older, there are gonna be people who are younger who had a head start. And as long as the next guy honors the fact that that guy died on the battlefield to give him these lessons and come back, and they have to recognize that they're going to die on the battlefield too for the next generation to pass them, they have it easier than us. That's the point of progress. And so rather than lamenting that the next generation has it easier, I thought that what we all say, I wanna make the world a better place, well, that's what making the world a better place looks like. We say that this is our mission with our business. We want to make the world a better place. We want to make an impact. And then when it actually happens, we resent the kids for the fact that they didn't have it as hard as us. That was the point. My point is not to beat the progeny. My point is to forge as far as I can, look back and be like, hey, watch out for that hole, watch out for that rock, keep going, keep going. They move through the path that we tread 3 times faster than we did because we already cleared all the trees. They get to the next non-clearing and they have to start hacking away and hacking away and hacking away to forge the next path. And then they become the mentors, turn around, and the next generation moves 6 times as fast to cover my distance and their distance. If you look at some of the greatest success stories, a lot of them talk about their mentors. Warren Buffett had his mentor early on. The quick story on that was that he said, I'll work for you for free. And Paul Graham told him, you're overpriced. He was the one who's going to be giving far more to this relationship. Even if Warren gave him his time, he still was going to be on the losing side. But he still did it anyways because he recognized that Warren had a gift. Warren passed him in his career. You'll notice that Warren isn't like, man, I'm so much better than Paul Graham. I passed that dude in my 40s. He doesn't talk like that. We really do stand on the shoulders of the giants. When I think about the gratitude that I have for the Gary V's who's 12 years older than I am, he's forged so much of this path that I didn't have to think about how am I going to create this whole thing. It's he already had a blueprint and I can just start laying that out, immediately execute. There are guys who we have in our portfolio right now who are in their 20s, who are making twice what I was making at 30. But if they came to me below and then now they're above, that was the point. Gary Vee didn't have Gary Vee to mentor him on his career. I do right now. We all do. Many of us will pass Gary, and I don't think Gary minds. There's a 20-year-old, it might be you, who's watching this, and you've got me. That's the point. I'm still going to be hustling and trying to beat you. Don't get me wrong. When I see guys who are in their 60s, I'm like, man, by the time I'm 60, I'm going to be 10 times as wealthy as them. 10 times the real estate. I have 10 times the... Yeah. But if they had themselves as mentors, they would too. If your mentees and the students that you have and the people that you help and the people that you teach don't move above you, it means that you're a bad teacher, not a good one. The new definition of success of a teacher is that the students surpass the teacher and then get to the point where they're both looking together with his experience and his raw talent, looking at the new landscape saying, all right, what do you think we should do?
I started studying wealth after I became wealthy. So
what did you learn about it afterwards? And what do wealthy people do that you think poor people don't do?
They pick higher leverage opportunities, in a sentence. So rich dad, poor dad, poor dad says get a job. Poor dad says get a higher paying job. Rich dad says and the thing is there's so many innate beliefs that seem commonplace. Well, of course. You know what I mean? Well, of course, you buy some real estate and it'll appreciate over time. Of course, you invest in some stocks. Yeah, of course. But poor dads just don't say that. And so you have to learn that, I think. And I didn't, so I'm grateful in that I didn't have to learn that because I heard that just was, of course, yeah, once you have some money, of course you don't spend your whole income. Of course you don't. And so there's a lot of course you don'ts that I think I inherited just by being a saving father. But there's also some upper middle class people who don't save anything. So
right.
But I think my dad did I think he helped a lot with money hygiene. I think I've had a lot of really good money hygiene from my dad. The big breakthrough that I had for me was when I stopped focusing on, and this is going to sound backwards, but when I started my gyms, I was all about building the business, right? And when I built the biggest companies that I've had and now recently sold, and now we have our portfolio, it was about how do we make the most money? And I know that sounds completely backwards, but the only way that you can make the most money is to provide an exceptional valued service and charge a ton of money for it. And because I optimized around making money, I started going for low capital expense businesses because I had lost everything after that 5-year stint. Mm-hmm. And so I was never again am I going to reinvest every dollar from the business back into the business because I've lost it before. So when I started the next business and every business I've had thereafter, we take dividends every month. And we do that because...
You don't wait till there's an exit 10 years later and put all your money in.
I'd love to do both.
Yeah.
Why not both?
Sure.
Right? And so that was...
Take a dividend and get a bigger dividend. Yeah. But not just put money in and wait and get no money back.
100%. And the thing is, and this was a fallacy I had, because people always talk about reinvesting in their business, but I realized that just meant that they weren't making profit. And so the vast majority of businesses, even the software world is somewhat shifting in this. But they want to see profit. And then even better is if you have net free cash flow, which is just a fancy word for the amount of money that you can take out every month after making necessary investments in the business. And so I wanted to have businesses that pumped cash flow because I had lost it all before. And so I think there's a lot of, every one of my business seasons, I would say I've had 3 business seasons. I had my gym ownership period. I had my turnaround and early gym launch day period. And then I had Prestigious Labs, the licensing business in Allen. That was my last season.
Where you exited all of them.
Yeah, and then I'd say now we're in our 3rd season, I guess. So brick and mortar gyms, licensing, supplements, and software. And then third season is what we have now. And each of those has a huge magnitude of leverage that was added to it. And so, this like Gym Launch was started on accident in that I was like, this might be a way that I could make money. For me, a very core belief that has been, I think, intrinsic to at least the material success that we've experienced has been a belief that meaning is self-ascribed. So that there is no inherent meaning in the things that we do, or the actions we take, or the outcomes that happen, but only that which we ascribe to it. And so because of that, I feel like it's allowed me, to the point of what you were saying about like the amount of pain and the amount of suffering that you have to go through in order to achieve the things on the other side. I think it's allowed me to reframe a lot of the discomfort into, what if this just is how it always has been? Or what if this is actually amazing? And what if this is exactly what it should look like? And so I think a lot of times it's the discrepancy between our expectations and reality that shape the emotions that we have in response to any given situation, bad, good, etc. And so I think a lot of people can't control their state. And we deal with this with a lot of the portfolio companies. It's funny because I don't even necessarily want to get in this. I want to talk about like the business and what's the strategy and how we're going to execute this stuff. But there's a big percentage of time where they're stressed and they think there's something wrong with that. And so I feel like a lot of people feel like there's something wrong with experiencing human emotions. And so they are stressed and then think there's something wrong with them, or they are sad. And I know that this is the thing that the keyboards are, their fingers are right on top of it. It's my belief. It is contrarian. I accept that it's the beliefs we have about our emotions that are the things that drive us mad.
Facts.
And so somebody's sad and then they tell themselves that they're bad because they're sad, or they're wrong to be sad, or they're a piece of shit because they're sad. Rather than saying, isn't this a beautiful thought about the human existence? Like, if I could not be sad, then I would not experience joy. So like, if I say that I don't want to be sad anymore, then I would also have to give up joy. Am I willing to do that? No. Well, then this is just a part. Like, I can't say that I want sunny days if there are no rainy days. Like, we don't say weather is good or bad, it just is. And so I think to the same degree, the human experience is also that way too, at least how I define it. And so I think having that as my backbone frame in terms of my worldview, although contrarian, has helped me a lot in dealing with the things that often derail entrepreneurs on their path to getting what they want. And so for me, that's been very helpful. So from a contrarian standpoint of like belief, Peter Thiel's question, like what closely held beliefs do you have that most people don't agree with? That's one of them.
The thing is your decision-making process is ultimately the most valuable thing that you have, right? It's what makes you, it's your picker, right? It makes you decide what way to go, who you're going to marry, what business opportunity you're going to pursue, how you're going to price, how you're going to start marketing, what you're going to learn first, who you're going to, get mentoring from, all of these things, who you're going to become friends with. Like, all of these are decisions, right? And, you can take the money away from a billionaire and then they can recreate it again. Elon Musk, lost it and then gained it all back, right? And so like the thing is the decision making is what ultimately fuels all these things. And the hardest part about entrepreneurship, and really, I think almost life in general, is that you can make the right decision and have the wrong outcome. And I think, and let me give you a couple of examples of this. So for example, you may say, you know what, like I listen to Warren Buffett. I think he's a good investor. And so he says, I wouldn't touch Bitcoin, right? And I hear that and I'm like, man, well, he knows a little bit more about it than I do. But his argument was simple. It is speculative, which means I'm buying it not because it has intrinsic value, but only because I believe that someone else will buy it for more later, right? That's all it is. He only believes in investing in things that have intrinsic value and also produce, right? So they actually have production. So like a business you buy, you still own the business at the end, and then it spits out production, which would be profit or crops or whatever, right? And so that's the basic difference, right? And so the thing is that you can make the right decision. So for example, I chose not to buy Bitcoin 2 years ago or whatever. And now the amount of money that it would have been worth is a lot more. Was the decision wrong? Or was it that the outcome did not match the quality of the decision? And so let me explain. Let me unpack this. If you are going to change the way you make decisions because a decision that you made in the past that was probably a good decision ended up bad, you have to apply the same decision-making context or framework to everything else. All right, so let me explain. So if I say I'm now going to be a speculator, right? I'm going to be someone who buys things with the hopes of selling them later for more, even though the thing itself doesn't have more value, right? If I choose to start making those types of decisions, then
I have to think about all the other investments I would have made and lost money on as a result of that decision-making framework. And the place that I heard this first was Ray Dalio in Principles. So he's one of the richest men in the world, an investor as well. And he said, one of the hardest things is passing up on an opportunity and then seeing it, do really, really well, right? He's like, but the thing is I have to think to myself, if I were to use the decision-making framework that would have made that deal a winner, then I'd have to apply that same framework to all of these other businesses or situations that would have been losers. And my net of having that different decision-making framework would ultimately cause me to lose. And so this has been one of the most powerful concepts for me as an entrepreneur, because what it does is it allows me to separate the outcome from the quality of the decision. Why was it that I did these things, right? And I can't even tell you, so for example, actually I won't give that one, but there are decisions that I made when I was younger that ended up being, poor later. But when I thought back about why I made the decision, I would make the same decision today. So it's not fair for me to say, well, I wouldn't have made the same call now. But you can't use the information that you have today to make the decision that you would have made in the past, because then it means that you were a different person because you're not using information that you have access to, right? And so claiming that this decision that I did in the past that didn't end up well, working out in my favor, was the wrong call can just be really poisonous, and it may not be true. Now, if you make a mistake because you had poor calculations and you repeat the same mistake over and over again, then you should consider looking at your decision-making calculus and see if you need to tweak some things, right? But for me, this has been one of the hardest learned lessons, and emotionally one of the most trying, is looking at decisions I've made, looking at the outcome, and being able to separate, was this a good decision independent of the outcome? And I'll wrap this up with just a quick example to show you. If you had a perfect baseball swing, right? You're just an amazing, batter, right? If someone gets up there and they're the best batter in the world and they strike out, is it because their swing is horrible? Is it because they don't have the right decision-making about how they swing at pitches or how they pick their pitches? Probably not. He's probably a really good batter, right? Because I just said he's the best. But it still means he's going to strike out, and it still means he's going to get out and hit pop flies and all that kind of stuff. But he's going to be an amazing batter with a 350 average or whatever, and still 2 out of 3 times he's going to strike out, or basically, not get on base, get out. And so when I think about that, you can be the best at this thing and still only be right a certain percentage of the time, right? And so rather than that batter striking out once and saying, I need to change my swing, and then getting back up there and striking out again and be like, I need to change my swing, and always resetting the baseline, instead being like, I understand that if I apply this swing to enough at-bats, quite literally, I will get the opportunity to knock it out of the park. And me knocking out of the park on one of these right decisions will ultimately outweigh the negatives of the wrongs that I have done.
I say this because all of us, right? I do this all the time, right? And this is going to be a repeated theme because it needs to be repeated, right? We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. That is a saying that we have in my world, and I will pass it on to you guys, Mosey Nation. We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. Do the boring work, repeat successful actions. And so if he's gotten to this point, or if you've gotten to a point in your business and it has plateaued, the question is, has it plateaued because this is true? The only reason a business should plateau that is reasonable, that is not your fault, is that you have reached the total addressable market, as in you have saturated the total market of that thing. So for example, if you were selling dog food, and every dog within this, maybe you sell a specific type of niche of poodle food, right? You've gotten, 70% of poodle owners to buy your food, and you can't grow any more beyond that, right? Well, that would be reasonable, but then you'd obviously just do a different type of dog, right? You'd hop verticals, right? So there's not even a reason, but it would be the only potentially rational reason would be that your market has changed. So a different example is a friend of mine owns a company that does newspaper advertising. All right, so they actually help newspapers translate their advertisements into digital products, which is pretty cool. So they are able to sell basically a whole new ad product to small businesses who want to buy ads, right? Which is, by the way, how newspapers make money. He could not grow his business because newspapers have shrunk by 25% year over year, which is 25% compounding the wrong direction. And he's been in that business for like 10 years. So now the market size is like literally like 5% of what it used to be 10 years ago. And so as a result of that, he was growing at an inverse rate to the shrinkage of the industry, right? And so he got to a point where he couldn't grow any more than just basically servicing the ones that are still alive. And then as they fell, so did his business, right? And so that is the only logical reason that a business can plateau that is not in your control. And unless you're selling to newspapers, which you're probably not, the reason is much simpler, which is you just don't know how. And I'll tell you a different story that I had, and then I'll wrap this up at the end. So I was having a different conversation with a woman who was doing, I think, $4 million a year. And she was selling info products that were weight loss. So like weight loss info products. So like programs and ebooks and things like that, which is cool, right? She has a big following, all that kind of stuff. And I did a podcast with her, and after we got off the podcast, she was like, yeah, so these are my plans. I'm going to be doing like an apparel line and a supplement line and a cream line and a whatever, right? And I just kind of sat there and I was like, well, I think it's a terrible idea. She was like, she just looked at me cross-eyed. She's like, what? And I was like, yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. And she was like, oh. And I was like, why don't you just take the thing that's making you $4 million and make you $10 million? Why don't you do that? And the answer is the same as the first answer. I just don't know how. And I was like, right, well, why don't we solve that problem and then not create a new business? Why don't we just put all of our effort into solving that problem? And so I'm a big believer, and this is the piece that I want to share with you, Mozi Nation, is that I'm a big believer in the theory of constraints, which means that a system will grow until it is constrained, right? It has a constraint, and then once you remove the constraint, it will continue to grow, right? Until it reaches another constraint. And so most people are always curious, or many people ask me, hey, Alex, how did you achieve, quote, so much in, quote, such little time or at such a young age? And I say all that in quotes because so much could be and young age, whatever. But I'm paraphrasing, all right? And I think that one of the things that we have done well is prioritizing what problems to solve. And that is understanding the prioritization of problems and realizing that there is really only typically one or two things that are constraining our growth. And by definition, there'd really only be one thing that's the constraint until we reach another thing that might be beginning to constrain us, but isn't the true constraint yet.
Deficits occur when we speak desires, right? And so I love this statement. A desire is a contract we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. And so whenever we state a desire, like I want this amount of money, I want whatever, you literally sign a contract that says like, I won't be unhappy until that happens, right? And so like I had this thing earlier on where I was like, I want to have meaning. I want to have great meaning in my life. And I was talking to a guy who made a lot more money than me because I asked him, I said, how do you create and destroy meaning in your work? That was the question I asked him on a podcast. And he was like, why do you think life needs to be meaningful? And it was the same exact thing as the happiness versus like the meaning thing, where it's like, I say life has to be meaningful, and therefore everything that I'm doing, like I create this expectation of life. Whereas if life just is, it just is. And it's the only way that you can actually be there. It's just pure acceptance, right? Which is why like the whole like shoulds of like, we should work, we should have balance, we should X. It's like, I believe marriage is a compromise. Like these are just statements of belief that are casting expectations out in the world that are just bound to be untrue at some point and then create dissonance. And so it's like, I believe marriage is marriage, and I believe my marriage is my marriage, and I believe your marriage is your marriage. And like, I believe that I can work 24 hours a day if I want to. And that is all, period. Not, and it's bad or, and it's good. And there's no judgment on it. It just is. And so like, if I get dopamine secreted in my brain when I start working, cool. Like, and I will optimize for dopamine. And if I die, I know that in 1,000 generations, nothing I do anyways is going to matter. So who cares? Like, that's like the opening thing in my book is like, there are no rules. Like we live in this shoulds and have tos and like happiness. Everyone talks about it. And it's just like, everyone is unhappy because they say they want to be happy rather than being like, accepting like, fuck happiness. Like I just am, period. And then like, I don't need to judge the am. It just is. As a quick, pro tip for everybody, if you've got stuff that people ask you to do for them because you're good at it, maybe you're good at tech. It's like, can you help me set up my like Wi-Fi and stuff, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that means you're solving problems. You can charge, like what people ask you to do as a favor is an indication of the things that you can charge for later, right? So I had all these people who were asking me, not all these, a handful of people who would ask me for programs and stuff. And so what I did was, during my last year of consulting, I started something called the Free Training Project. And so the Free Training Project was, I would charge $500 to $1,000, but I wouldn't charge it. They had to donate that to the charity of their choice in exchange to work with me, right? And so that way I wanted people to value it, but they weren't paying me directly. So they'd get a write-off. They felt good. I had a ton of goodwill, also in the marketplace too, because I was like, I'm doing all this stuff for charity. I got all these people reaching out to me like, this is so cool, blah, 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 right? And so after a year of doing that, I had probably, 12 really good like great before and after pictures that I had collected from my clients. And I told them that was part of the deal. I was like, you have to donate it. I would like to do this for real later, but you have to let me use your testimonial. And they were like, that's fine. So once I had that, I had those first, 10, 12 customers who had great before and after pictures. I transitioned many of those customers, said, hey, I'm going to do this full time now. Are you comfortable paying the same amount you were paying to charity, except just making it charity of Alex, because Alex can't eat either. And that was actually how I transitioned from not-for-profit or donating everything. And I didn't even set up the entity. I just told them to literally donate it and send me the screenshot. I didn't even do anything like that. And so I didn't have a website. All I had was an LLC and a PayPal account. So like for everybody's like, I don't know how to start a business. I was like, you literally just need a bank account and a way to process money. That is it. Like 2 things. And you can Google how to figure it out. If you can't figure it out from Google, entrepreneurship might not be for you. All right. But you think about, there's 30 million businesses in the United States. 30 million other people have figured this out, which means you can too. So bank account, payment processing. Make the first 10 free or some sort of charitable thing so that people don't feel weird, or you don't feel weird about selling, et cetera. After you have it, after you're providing this service to people, you can transition people from free service to paid service. And if they don't want to start paying you, then that gives you insight as to either you suck, right? Or they suck, which is also possible too. But either way, a certain percentage of those people will continue to stay and pay you. And now you have income. Now, you can also ask those people for referrals, which is exactly what I did. So I think half that business came in just from, the initial ones came in from friends and family and me posting. And so I'll close the loop on what I said earlier. A year later, after I had those testimonials, I made a public post being like, hey, I've got this thing now. I made a website, that was my big announcement. I made a website. I still have the post. I found it. It's 2013. I was like, I made a website, and I am now open for business. And so if you would like, training stuff, let me know. This is what I'm doing now. And I had some testimonials, and go check out the site, whatever. And so from there, I was able to get, I think, about 20 guys who were willing to let me do just like almost bodybuilding type stuff. Because I was kind of like I was powerlifting bodybuilder back then. And so I want to say I got 20 guys at $200 a month. And so I was making $4,000 a month from those people. And it took me 4 hours every Saturday to do the fulfillment.
What was the fulfillment?
I would just update their training programs and send them nutrition, update their macros, updated meal plans, and then new workout split for the week, et cetera. And then everyone had my cell phone, and I would just text them the new stuff. And if they had any questions, they could hit me up. It was a very simple business. And so that's what I did. It was just one-on-one online. And it only took me 4 hours on Saturday morning. And to show you what kind of person I am, I hated it. Even though I loved fitness, I hated having to do the same thing every day, on the delivery side. So I ended up having the genius idea of saying, oh, I need to own a gym because then I'll be a business owner. I'm really just self-employed right now. And so that's what got me to start my gym, rather than probably doing the wiser decision and saying, okay, this costs you 4 hours a week and you're making $4,000 a month. Maybe you should do this for 40 hours a week.
I think that expectations are literally the thing that will destroy your life or will make your life. And many of us, I think many people in general have, figured out, and many world religions have figured this out, which is, the secret to happiness is haves over wants, which is, let's say you have one thing and you want nothing, you will be infinitely happy. The problem is where you might have 1 million things, but you want 2 million things, and you will not be happy, right? And so you can simply change how happy you are by expecting less. And so one of the things that I specifically wanted to address today was the expectations around education. And the reason this is a really meaningful topic for me is that I think I've talked to you about my neighbor, and watching him go through the crazy expectations that he has as a young person has been really valuable for me because I've also seen a lot of those characteristics that he has in myself, just add zeros to it, but it's still fundamentally the same thing. And that's what's been, it's been meaningful for me. And so anyways, I have tried to frame things. So if you are trying to learn things, which is going to be the first step to any kind of entrepreneurial endeavor, is I like to liken everything to a bridge because I think it's a simple visual. So imagine where you are on one side of, this valley, right, is where you are. And where you want to go is on the other side of this big valley, right? And you have a bridge that goes across the two sides. Now, the problem is that people will buy things. They will buy courses, they will buy mentorships, they'll buy workshops, they'll buy seminars, they'll buy events, they'll buy whatever, right? In an effort on some level to get over this bridge, right, of where they are to where they want to go. And it could be from $0 to $100,000 a year. It could be from $1 million a month to $2 million a month. It could be from $100 million a year to $1 billion a year. Whatever it is, there's a bridge, right? And along that bridge are bricks. And I like to liken each skill as a brick on the way to where you're trying to go. And the problem with the expectations of somebody who's trying to learn a skill or achieve a goal is that they have a binary outcome. I either achieved it or I did not. I either am making $100,000 or I am not. And the problem is it can be incredibly frustrating because if you have a binary outcome, then it's very easy to get a 0 out of 1, right? Where the reality is most things exist on a continuum. And so this is the difference between a psychological binary and the biological continuum, which is, I'll give you a couple of examples. So it's not, are you diabetic? Are you not diabetic? It's how diabetic are you, right? It's not, are you smart or are you dumb? But it's how smart are you, right? And so we like to psychologically bucket things into yes, no's because it's simpler for us, but it misses actual reality, right? And this can be especially dangerous as we're trying to acquire new skills. And so the reason I liken this, and I think it's so dangerous in education, because that's what we're doing, right? If we're trying to educate ourselves, we're trying to acquire skills, is that we think as we're trying to get across this bridge that let's say you buy a course on copywriting, right? And so you're on one side of the bridge, you buy a course on copywriting, and then you still aren't a millionaire. Wow, right? The problem is, you may have put another brick on your bridge. You may be closer to where you were to getting to the other side of the bridge. You just haven't achieved it yet. And so this is one of the issues that I also see just in general. Like it's so funny because in the I'll say quote guru world, people will take on a coach. That coach will move them forward, to a certain degree, and then they'll take another coach, and that coach will move them forward to a certain degree, and so forth and so on. And then the thing is that they're like, I'm working with so-and-so, I used to work with that person, they suck, right? But the problem, and I used to do this, right? Like, and this is why I think it's so ridiculous, is that like, if you were looking at your schooling, right? And you had a third grade math teacher, and then later you had a calculus teacher, you wouldn't be like, screw that third grade math teacher. The stuff that I'm learning from this guy is so much, more advanced, whatever, right? And I've had a lot of our clients say that about their franchises that they work with and things like that. And it drives me nuts because it's stupid. It's for lack of it's stupid because a lot of times you need step 1 to get to step 2, right? And you don't have to. And it's because people have psychological issues, but like they can't say I've learned from all of these people, right? And it doesn't decrease your status to say I've learned from many teachers. Look at all the richest people in the world. They say like, I've had multiple mentors. I've had so many people help me out over the years. And I think if you can shift that perspective, it will be incredibly valuable for you.
There are a lot of different things that come up in the business world where I will see people conflate or mistake what thing they are solving, right? And most times when I'm talking to a newer entrepreneur or even a more established entrepreneur and they reach out for help or guidance or whatever, right? Or it's one of our portfolio companies, most times they'll start talking, right, really fast about all this stuff to try and provide context. And I'll just usually pause them and be like, what problem are we solving? It usually gets them to stop, right? And I would highly advise you, if you're dealing with, if you have subordinates or you have direct reports who roll into you and they have a whole bunch of decisions, a lot of times it can get caught, and sometimes ourselves too, we can get caught in the day-to-day, the minutia, and just simply pause and say, what problem are we solving? There's so many pieces of this that I want to unpack that I think are going to be really interesting for you. But the first one is, when you define what problems you are solving, you may even have to ask the question, is that a problem? When some people are like, well, hey, we're getting, customer service complaints. It's like, okay, understood. Is this something that we believe that we can reasonably eliminate? Is this something that is catastrophic to the business, or is this something that we can kind of try and improve over time, through systems and process, right? And so a lot of times people misprioritize problems because they perceive them as threats to existence, when in reality they are a course of doing business and things that we can consistently improve, right? Especially if you're newer. You're starting out, of course your product's not going to be perfect yet, right? You're just getting going. But you improve these things rather than thinking I have to stop everything to fix this problem, right? And so the first frame shift is that most people think in terms of like, I have a problem to solve rather than a dichotomy to be managed, as in these are two things that will always exist. All right, I'll give you a different example of this. Actually, this will be a fun one. The reason we will probably never have people who are all happy about a tax code is because you cannot have both fairness and equality. Equality means everyone pays 10%. Fairness means the rich people pay more than the poor people. That's fair. This is equal. Both are ideals. And yet, somehow they're not the same thing. And yet both are right. And so because of that, we will always have this conflict. It's the same thing between justice and mercy. Both of them are ideals. Both of them are right. And yet somehow they're conflicting. And so we see these situations, and this is why I'm trying to hopefully give this to you, because the more I started to recognize these patterns, the more quickly I could recognize them and then identify them and then either dismiss them or say, oh, it's another one of those, right? It's a pattern recognition. It's like, oh, you guys are spending all this effort trying to solve a problem that is unsolvable. This is a dichotomy that must be managed and will never be eliminated. And so I think my goal with this video is if I can help you get out of these little mental hamster wheels, it's been incredibly valuable for me. All right. So that's the dichotomy. That's like one of the things that people will mistake. They'll mistake a dichotomy for a problem that needs to be solved. All right. Another framework that I find immensely valuable is the concept of a continuum versus a binary. All right. This is probably one of the biggest mental errors that people make when they're trying to identify things. And this is what I mean by that. So, for example, I might say, I'll use a weight loss example. So people will say something like, I am off my diet or I'm on my diet, right? It's a very simple thing. And that's because psychologically we like to be binary. We like to label things as yes or no. But biology and reality exists on continuums, as in, to what extent did you go off of your diet, right? Did you go 200 calories over? Did you go 500 calories over? And even though it is, quote, more difficult to think in this way, it is also more accurate. And so our brain uses binaries as placeholders for decision-making to store data, right? When in reality, when you start storing all these binary decisions, they start adding up and you start getting more and more inaccurate, if that's a word, on your decision-making process, because you're actually basing your decisions not on facts, but based on binary shorthand that your brain saves. And so that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see all the time in thinking in entrepreneurs and really in anything in general, because we like to have that shorthand. It is easier, right? It's easier to say, I fell off my diet, or I am diabetic, when the reality is, it's not whether you are diabetic, it's how diabetic are you, right? Kind of interesting. I stole that from Dr. Cashy, but I just love that. Who's my closest friend? He's a biochemist, and we talk about this stuff all the time. Point being, if you can think about this within, I'll give you a business example. So if we have a binary where people are saying yes or no, which is, let's say, Facebook doesn't work. Marketing doesn't work. I hear these statements all the time, and you may laugh at this, right? But I get DMs like this all the time. Facebook doesn't work for me. Marketing doesn't work for me. Like, you can't sell this way in my business, right? And so people want to shorten a problem into yes, it works, no, it doesn't work, when so much of business and problem solving is understanding the nuance between where we're starting and where we're going. And it's to what extent has Facebook not worked, right? Where is the fall off? Right? It is not that it doesn't work. It is just we only got it to work this %. Right now, we need to get all the way over the hump to get there. But it's to what extent? And I think that if you can ask the right questions, if you can see the problems as they truly are, they become far more solvable. And so this has been probably, I just gave you two of my best frames that I think with all the time. All right, so I'll say these again. So the first mental lapse, I'll say, that I see all the time is mistaking a dichotomy that needs to be managed for a problem that needs to be solved. People do this in their marriages as well, right? So you look at your wife, right? You look at your wife and you're like, I need more variety, right? But later you're like, I need more consistency. And you're like, we have to figure this out. We need variety. We need consistency. It's like, yes, you need both, right? And so it's not a problem to be solved, it's a dichotomy to be managed. Most people, unless your parents are exorbitantly wealthy and have achieved everything that you wish to achieve, I don't think you should listen to your parents. And so one of my first rules of life is never listen to someone who's poorer than you or poorer than you want to be. All right, so that's two different, caveats there, because you might be younger and it's like, okay, well, yeah, my parents have more money than me, but like, are they poorer than you want to be? If so, then only listen to people who are wealthier than you want to be. And the thing is that they always will side on the side of being less risky, because when you naysay, right, it's like kind of like when you're, if someone's like, oh, I don't like your girlfriend, and the thing is that if you date, then fundamentally every single person that you date, except for the one that you marry, is going to be somebody who you're not going to be with. And if someone says, I don't think this person's good, I don't think this person's good, then they will be right literally 99% of the time, except for the one time that matters, right? And so the thing is most businesses fail. 95% of businesses fail within 5 years. And so most times they are correct. And so it's very easy for them to self-reinforce that they're so smart, right? And they're always right. And they can tell you, I told you so. But the reality is that they are wrong in the 1% of times that it matters in your life. And so when I think about this, what's interesting is that like, the only way that is guaranteed to not get to success is to never take the risk to begin with, right? That's the guaranteed way of not achieving it. And I remember when I was quitting my job, that was the biggest conclusion that I came to, was that I was not happy at my current earning level, and that the only job, because there was one job that made enough money that I wanted, which was being an investment banker. So the best investment bankers can make $10, $20 million a year. But I knew what it was required to get there and the amount of effort, time, and sacrifice. And I was like, the only people who will pay me that amount of money will be making so much more money off of me and literally draining my life, that I don't think it's, because like usually if you become an investment banker that's successful, you pretty much donate 20 years of your life in order to do that. And you're really never going to see your family and all that kind of stuff. And for me, that was not a trade-off I wanted to make. And so I figured there was no job that was going to pay me what I wanted to make and afford me the lifestyle that I wanted. And so the path that I was on was guaranteed to not get me to where I wanted to go. And so even though it was micro risky, it was macro the only way I could do it. Right. And so that's one of those things actually, like from Gary Vee, that he says micro speed, macro patience, right? Money loves speed, wealth loves time. And so if we're trying to build wealth, we're trying to build an asset, right? Then we need to have time. One of my other favorite sayings that I'll share with you is you get paid for what you do, you get returns on what you own. Right. And so anyways, back to the reason why you shouldn't listen to other people is that they don't have an accurate understanding of risk. Right. And the biggest risk is not doing anything at all. The biggest risk is never dating, not that you're with this person. Right. And so Warren Buffett said, and I like this, he said, most people only need to make 4 or 5 really good decisions in their life. So think about that for a second, because I think about, like, that one really shook me, because I think about all the decisions that I make every single day, right? And all the decisions that I've made in my life. And there's really not that many of them that have been the biggest levers, but the few that have been massive and enormous levers in my life. And most people don't take enough time to think about those decisions that are the massive forks in the road. Am I going to keep going in this position? Do I want to live in this city? Am I going to marry this girl? Who am I going to get into business with? What are we going to do? Right? What are we actually going to do in this business? And so people don't put enough thought into that stuff and spend all their time thinking about what next show they're going to watch on Netflix, right? Rather than thinking like, I'm going to take some time with this decision. Because one of my other sayings is mistakes love a rushed decision, right? So micro speed, macro patience. If you're looking at playing long, then you have to understand, or at least this is my 2 cents on it, is that most people will oppose you at all times. And that is because it is safer for them to do so, because they will be right most of the times. But on the 1% of times that they are wrong, it's that 1% decision saying that you're going to buy See's candies for $25 million and ends up generating $1 billion, right, in revenue. It's that one decision that they're going to miss out on. And that's the one decision that matters. And so they are 99% of the time right, but they're 100% wrong. Right? And so that's the only message that I wanted to really drive home, is that if you have parents who make less money than you want to make, if you have friends who make less money than you want to make, I had so many people who told me that everything I was doing was stupid. I was giving up a really good consulting job to open a gym, right? I took all my savings and sunk it into a business. And you know what? That business wasn't the one that set me free. It was four or five businesses from there. But I learned the skills that one by one, I was able to assemble on a belief standpoint of the world with the character traits to reinforce them to eventually yield the success that some people think is, cool.
I think a lot of my definitions have been defined by my actions. And so I am the person who has done these things, and I will do things that will get me closer to the things that I want to achieve. And so a lot of my definition of self has always been based on evidence. And so I think it was harder for me in the beginning because I didn't have evidence to support what I hoped to be true about myself, which at the time wasn't. And so
what did you hope to be true? That you could figure it out? Or was it always a result
that you associated it to?
I mean, it was, I want to make more money than my dad. You know what I mean? That was the thing, you know, for me. And that was all I needed. You know what I mean? I remember thinking, in college, because you're young in college and it's like, be happy and all that stuff. And I just remember being like, happiness. And that was like a moment for me. I was like, happiness. I don't care about happiness. I want to do this.
Why didn't you care about happiness? That's very counterintuitive even now, super counterintuitive at that age.
Yeah. Because I was obsessed with how not happy I was. And so
so the things you were doing that weren't designed to make you happy, that's what's weird.
So I was so obsessed with like positive psychology, and I was reading all these stuff and watching these TED Talks. I remember this whole period of my life. And I was constantly assessing my mood as a determination of whether I was happy or not. And it became so obsessive that I was just like, all of this. I was like, I'm just going to do shit. And that's all. I was like, I'm just going to do shit, and hopefully it works out. And
did you ever define what works out means? If it isn't happiness,
be less unhappy, I would say, was my thought process, which was like, I'm just going to do the things. And so I shifted from a lot of introspection, internal mood regulation and thinking and stuff. And I think a lot of the reason that I have the worldviews I have about, emotions and whatnot have come from this kind of initial experience. So it's like I had that, and then I just started working, and then I found myself actually looking up after, a decent period of time, being like, I haven't thought about happiness in a long time, and I think I might be. And so I also don't really like the word happiness because it's circumstantial versus joy, but like I experience joy significantly more now than I did then when I was younger. And I think it's partially because like you can be mournful and joyful at the same time. Imagine someone like, it's like an appreciation of the human experience. Like, this is terrible, but like even in the suffering, there's beauty in that. You know what I mean? Because it's purely human.
Yeah.
And so I think it was disconnecting.
It's interesting that it matters to me as well, but I've never had to articulate it. What is the connection to like the human experience that is so valuable that it's joyful even in mourning?
I think it's just understanding both sides of the coin. I feel so if there's few things that I believe, it is that like right now there's things in my life that I don't like that I wish were better, and there are things in my life that I really like, and 10 years ago it was the same way, and 10 years from now it'll be the same way. And when I die, there will be stuff that I will not have accomplished that I will wish I had, and there will be things that I wish I had done better that I will not have done, and there will be things that I have done that I am proud of. And so like those things are not going to change. And so if the only thing this sounds hopefully not overly trite, but it's like all I can do is just enjoy the game. And it took me a really long time to get there. Like it took me a really long time to get there, or at least it felt that way, or at least it felt like I suffered a lot on that process, which is why I have a heart for people who are like, dude, I'm super sad, I'm super depressed, whatever it is. And it's because I judged myself so much on not being happy all the time, because I thought there was something wrong with the fact that I wasn't happy, that I drove myself insane not being happy, rather than just being like, you know what, maybe I'm just going to do the stuff and just happiness for a minute. And so I think it's like when we have these, am I happy, am I not happy? I think my opinion is that you have to rise above it so that you can just you can feel the spectrum, which is just being present. Because I think, again, Alex's 2 cents, haven't been around that long. If you are present, you're present. Like most people aren't present ever. And so it's like, if I can just be present, even in my suffering, I'm there, right? Then I can experience joy for being human and having this experience that I only get once. And the biggest frame shift that I've had in terms of my experience of living has been, it sounds weird, but it's something I'll call the grandfather frame, which is I learned how to become apathetic, right? Because that took me time to stop feeling pain.
If you're just starting out, I think that for the most part, it's better to not have partners. And that is because usually it's like you and a buddy and you're like, hey, we like hanging out, we should go into business together. When really you're doing that for the emotional need to be satisfied, to have somebody to talk to and share the experience with, but not because it's a good business decision. And the only reason for you to have a partner is because they either have money or skills that you do not have. That is it. It's the only reason. Money or skills. That's it. And so if you both are entrepreneurial people and you're both, love selling and love marketing and you're very promotion oriented, which many entrepreneurs are, right? If that's you, then If they're that way too, then one of you is not required. And you have to really face that. So if you both like the same stuff, you both shouldn't be in business. You both have your own businesses and just talk about your own specific businesses, but not team up together. It almost always fails. Like literally it almost always fails. And so that's the first one. The second thing is that those jump into bed together partnerships don't have step number 2, which is you don't have a contract, you don't have terms, you don't have an agreement. And the reason is because you're so afraid of like messing up the vibe. We don't operate that way. You will when it gets up at the end. But I'm telling you right now, I now, even when I have somebody who approaches me and says, hey, like, will you take a percentage of my company? Can you coach me through this? Blah, blah, blah. I say, let's go through the lawyers first. All right. Because the thing is you get to see how this person acts under stress, because it is stressful, because inherently you're going to disagree on things. And so this is the perfect time for you to go kind of get a simulation of that. Well, it's like, well, what happens if you don't want to work and I want to work? What happens if you leave? What happens if I don't want to do this anymore? You have to go through all the scenarios and get a good lawyer. And you should really have 2 that represent you. If you don't have the money for that, then get somebody to just counsel you on, you can Google a standard partnership agreement. There are templates for free online, and you can pay one lawyer for 1 hour of time to at least say, these are the things you should look for. Now, decide amongst yourselves. And so you can represent yourself in your partnership, agreement, but you have to have the agreement and you have to spell it out in clear terms. Because if you don't have that, it's the bedrock of good communication and expectations, right? Like otherwise, usually, like most relationships, partnerships end because of unmet and unspoken expectations. Like, well, I thought you were going to do this. It's like, well, I didn't know. But no one even says that because they can't communicate. So first is you probably shouldn't just jump together with somebody because they're just like you. If you are going to do that, then you should make sure that you have contracts in place. And then finally, what I want to do is kind of explain to you what the 3 main roles that exist in a business are, okay? The 3 pillars. All right, I want to see if I have a tripod here. All right, here we go. Here's my tripod, all right? So there's 3 pillars to every business, all right? The first is acquisition, which is the rainmaker, or somebody who's going to bring in business. So that's marketing and sales, all right? Acquisition, the money getter, all right? The second of these is the product, which is what you are actually selling. It's the fulfillment, it's the service, it's the widget, it's the whatever, somebody who knows how to deliver it, all right? And then third, you have the operations, which is everything else that has to happen in the company. Paying payroll, paying taxes, making sure legal and contracts and IT and finance and all your accounting, all of that stuff, HR has to happen, right? And so these are the 3 legs of every business. Now, they're not necessarily equally weighted, and it's an important point, right? Like a lot of times there are good operators that you can get for significantly less, and many times not even equity, because there are more of them, right? Now, rainmaking, being able to bring in business, is a very highly valued skill in the marketplace. On the flip side, having the product that you're going to sell is also very valuable. Now, this is why skill stacking is so important. If you can have multiple of these skills, then you have 2 or all 3 of the legs, right? Now, these are the roles that have to exist. It doesn't mean you have to be partners with these people, but you have to have all 3 of these things for your business to stand up. And so, for example, within the company, I'll walk through my roles within each of the companies that I own. And so, the first is Gym Launch, right? So in Gym Launch, I am both the acquisition and the product, right? Or that was my founding role within the company. Leila, my wife, ran all the operations. So everything else. So like I said, IT, billing, legal, finance, HR, all of that stuff that had to happen, she took care of, right? Super important. But because of that, we had all 3 legs of the stool and we were able to build a business, right? If you're missing one of the legs, it's not going to work, right? This is where this is really dangerous, is like a lot of the marketing people that are in this world are really good promoters. They can get people in, they can sell them, but then they have no fulfillment. They have no thing, right? And then they have no one who's organized. And so everything, like you send emails in, you try and get help and they don't respond. It's because they just don't have the other pieces. I don't think it's because they're bad intentioned. I think they just don't have the skill. And so you have to have all 3. And so if you're going to bring someone in, you need them to have one of those things, right? Now, you can start a business and own all of it and just make sure that you fill the roles of those people. But as you're thinking through it, those are the roles. So if you're going to bring partners in the beginning, you want to be clear about what it is that they're bringing to the table. Now, if they're one of those 3, right, then that's a clearly defined role. And then at that point, that's what you can lay out in your agreement, and then you can argue about or negotiate whatever equity if you're doing this in the beginning. But if you've already started, at that point, then you can look at the 3 legs of the stool and see where am I lacking, right? And so for most of you guys who are listening, most people who follow me are on the or like the promotion side, so they like the acquisition side. Then what you need to do is find a strong operator, all right? And depending on what you're selling, if you know the thing that you're selling, then you can basically be product and acquisition and have a strong second to help you fulfill on those things and basically don't go to jail, right? And file your taxes and all the other stuff. And so when I'm thinking about partnerships and when I have younger guys who are coming in, many times after having discussions with me and then talking to them each other, they realize that they have the exact same role, they like the same things, and one of them is not necessary. And so they oftentimes split. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's better to recognize an error early than to recognize an error late. All right, and so you may be in one of these partnerships where you're like, we gotta both do the same thing. We kind of just overlap on everything. It's like, yeah, that's just 2 people working the same thing. And so it's not like, you don't want to just be like, oh, here's all this work, I'll do half, you do half. That's not a good partnership. You have to figure out what are the things I am good at, what are the things you are good at, and then we draw a line on the board, and everything on that side you own. And everything on this side I own, and I'm responsible for it. Because if everyone's responsible for everything, no one's responsible for anything, right? And then nothing's gonna get done, and then you can never know who to blame, and someday you're like, well, he takes out the trash, or sometimes I take out the trash, and we're just like kind of a get it done type of stupid. There's no big business that works that way. All right, and so even if you are small, you need to start thinking big to become big, right? So you got to do the actions before you get the results. You have to have the beliefs before you get the outcomes of a bigger business to become a bigger business. And the reason most businesses stay small is because they think small and they act small. So they stay that way because the outcome of what they're doing is the result of the actions they're making, which are small, right? And so right now, if you're in a partnership, if you don't have a partnership and you're thinking about starting a business, I would definitely try and just acquire the skills myself, get going, and then the first hire I'm going to have is going to be a strong operational second. All right? It's the first thing I'm going to do. If you are in a partnership, you need to put all the activities that you do on a board. I do this when I do consulting stuff. But all the activities that happen in the business on a board. If you don't know what it is, you do a time study, which means you write down every 15 minutes what you do in a week, right? Because you probably don't know because you're scattered all over the place. So if you write it all down and you both bring it to each other and you put it on a whiteboard or put it on a board, then what you can do is say, okay, these are all the things, these are all the activities that happen in our business. Let's divide these out and say who owns these, all right? And that's the very beginning of an organization because you are becoming organized. You are creating roles and responsibilities. You are creating specialization of skills, which is what moved humanity forward. Specialization is a good thing, right? And so at the very beginning, you get all of it on there and you can divide it out and you can divide it based on the skills of the person. If you both have the same skills, then either need to decide, okay, well, I'm gonna become a specialist in this and you're gonna become a specialist in this, or we shouldn't be doing this business together and you should do a business that's just like mine or something else and you should be that role for that company and you should find a second just like I will, all right? And oftentimes if you can at least think that way, then you don't liquidate the most valuable thing in the whole world, which is your equity, all right? Because if your thing actually does grow, if your business actually does grow, then the biggest dilution of how much money you're going to make is that first decision when you started, when you just decided just right off the bat to give half of everything away.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag Believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Gary Vaynerchuk, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe. I'll see you there.
Let me say that nice and slow so everyone understands. You should be fearful. Things are happening. Apple doesn't shut down production of iPhones for its health. Banks don't do what they are doing right now, which is clamping the f*** down.